I joined Vaughan Films 40 years ago when we were making all kinds of films about this and that, and also we were dealing with Andy Warhol and Kenneth Anger and people of that ilk. You know, we were interested in the underground movie business. And suddenly one of these days, one of my old friends called Philip Trevelyan turned up wanting to make a film about these curious people in near Horsham Station, and it seemed absolutely obvious that somebody should allow him to do this. So we did it. We put up the money. We made all kinds of arrangements so that it could happen. It was mostly done by Philip, who's after all a filmmaker himself, but he did it incredibly well.
Filmmaking is a team job. I worked with Richard Stanley and the team. I had a wonderful sound recordist, really quiet and sympathetic, and never sort of pushed himself forward, just quiet. Everybody was so skilled, and together we knew we made good stuff. And Richard Stanley, for instance, knew the Eclair camera backwards, absolutely backwards.
My bond with Chris and with Paul especially was a single kind of philosophical unit in which we talked a lot about what we did. It was like a little group that did from the technical side of the movie. And then Philip was, he was our kind of our connection to the pages, because when we were filming, when we were actually shooting, we didn't say very much. We hardly said anything, in fact. I would keep the camera rolling even though I felt that somebody had dried up, in a way as a kind of provocation that they would continue. And I think you can see that sometimes, that people feel that they should carry on saying something. We had technical problems in recording really good sound. We had technical problems. We didn't use any lights at all throughout the movie. We were improvising crane shots with tractors and all sorts of things. I don't even remember anymore how some shots happened, but certainly the close-ups were a fairly deliberate decision. But the problem is that when you do very big close-ups and people are moving, you have a problem of keeping people in frame. But I discovered that after 5 years of doing documentaries, that you develop an understanding of body language, and you kind of have an intuitive feeling what people are going to do next, before they know, because you're just following their body language. And that enables you to hold these very tight shots, because you kind of think, oh, when he moves, I'm going to follow him. But you didn't, because she's not holding to the camera anymore. She's just sitting there thinking. So that in that way, it was the culmination of a lot of thinking about how to make documentaries.
We ended up with an amazing collection of more or less unconnected films, shots, which we had to put together.
And it has no plot, it has no story, it has no clear narrative. There is a development in it from thinking that you're in the Garden of Eden to finding out that you're with unhappy families. So there is some kind of development in it. But none of the scenes is logically connected to the one before.
Barry Vince, the editor, and myself as Jimmy's partner tried to make some sense of this, which of course the sense was already there because Philip knew what he wanted to do. But on the other hand, there were so many other things going on, particularly, for example, the endless series of insects, the sort of fingers on the keyboard, little insects sort of crawling around at the same time. Phillips was very interested in that and wanted to keep far more in than we could possibly put. So I'm afraid we stamped on him and said, you can't do that. And the other thing was that it wasn't really possible when we got all the shots back to find out how he'd been able to, what he had in mind, actually. He had a great deal in mind, but on the other hand, it was very difficult to put it all together.
The task of the editor on this film was to find a structure for the film, for the scenes, which would hang together. And it was like building a bridge or something where every scene had to bear a certain amount of weight and be connected with the scene that followed it in a particular way which made some kind of sense. And then you'd have blocks of scenes which worked together, but then they had done their job, and then you had to make a transition to another block of scenes which did their job. So you can see it was quite like engineering. And the film was running 74 minutes, and it went to the Berlin Film Festival, where it was an instant success. Everybody recognized its unique quality.
I was in Berlin covering the Berlin Festival for the Times, and I ran into Philip Trevelyan in the street. He was looking a little lost, and so I helped him to find where the film festival was happening and so on. I was talking to him, and I thought, this sounds like an interesting young man with something interesting to say about on film, and so I'd better see his film, which I consequently did, and was absolutely bowled over by it.
But the producer, Jimmy Vaughan, couldn't sell it. For some reason, distributors felt that there was something about it they didn't think an audience, a general audience, would engage with it.
Jimmy and I used to argue constantly, but we were very fond of each other, and so we listened to each other. Jimmy's great effort in making the film possible, first of all, to get the money, and he liked the film that I'd made before enough to see that I had talent, or we had talent, and that it was worth encouraging me, and he did that. And spent long hours trying to persuade me to put a story into the film which was against my best instinct, what I thought were my best instincts.
I did know there was a lot of differences of opinion over the editing and what shots should stay, what should go.
Well, he was very busy doing other things as well. I could tell the story, but I don't really want to. How he went down to with its own camera unit. Do you remember?
He had a slightly different view on it.
We didn't use a single frame of what he brought home. And he learned quite a lot doing that as well, I think.
How do you feel now about his input?
Oh, very relevant. I've always knew it was. I always understood it was. But it was a battle.
Jimmy Vaughan was a rogue, but he was the absolutely indispensable rogue. He's the rogue without which absolutely nothing happens, and particularly in England. He was somebody who had a passion for cinema, who could burn away the whole night talking about movies. He was somebody who had an understanding of parts of cinema culture that not everybody actually either knew then or saw the point of. And he was also somebody who wanted to get this shown.
And so I worked together with Philip on the film, and together we took 9 minutes out of it. We reduced it from 74 minutes to 65 minutes. So we had actually refined the edit. We'd taken little amounts off certain scenes, 2 scenes we'd reduced substantially, and that created a substantial shift in the film, which then meant that a general audience would actually follow it through. But because of its unique quality, that there was no plot, we had to find that precise length for it. And I think in the end we did. And the film was then shown at the London Film Festival. As a result of that screening at the London Film Festival, the rank film distributors bought the film and had it blown up to 35mm and shown in the cinema as a support feature, and it finished up going out with a western called Junior Bomber. It went round the country.
The films of Humphrey Jennings, for instance, and other documentaries of the 30s, which were constructed poetically rather than literally, like not only Jennings but Song of Ceylon and other Basil Wright films, and it's put together like a poem, largely instinctively, I think, just the feeling of the inherent interest of things in it and how they blend together and how they sometimes contrast from moment to moment.
There was the kind of poetry in it, there was the sound design, there was something about the textures, there's something about the way in which Philip seemed to be living with a very particular family, a very idiosyncratic family.
Well, the Page family were the perfect subject, but they were also the impossible subject. Once you'd found them, you had extraordinary, distinct, clear characters operating in a world that nobody knew, doing things that were unfamiliar and extraordinary and fascinating to watch. They have a sense almost of ritual about the simplest thing. This is somebody who doesn't just oil a machine part. This is somebody who does it with the same attention that you might serve mass. This is quite extraordinary. But at the same time, they are an incoherent subject, unless you're very careful about how you put it together. Their lives don't have the kind of shape that we expect a movie, a story, a novel, whatever, to have. So you have this tension all the way through the film.
It's that marriage, that fusion between sound and image, and the alchemy that kind of creates, the possibilities that fusion or that marriage creates, which is outside of scripts. You know, you can't really do that with scripts. You can do it if you have a camera and you have a really sensitive crew that are capturing those moments, and then suddenly in the edit suite it all comes together again. And it was just remarkable when I saw it for the first time.
It was really a matter of putting the whole thing into a context, which meant really that the people were, what should we say, I mean, honest to themselves, and we were being honest with them. It's very important not to allow the film to become a kind of criticism or a kind of fun picture.
I think the easiest thing to do is to exploit and cajole and manipulate and use, you know, your subjects in a way that it's going to get laughs, or it's going to get kind of titillation. And it's really about the relationship between one of the brothers and one of the sisters.
Lovely. What a lovely smell. Cool. Reminds me of that old song, Kat.
Does? Well, sing again.
You are my garden of roses, kissed by the morning dew. Each little flower that opens, fortunes I find in you.
And it's kind of, you feel it, you feel a closeness, but it's never really exploited, it's never writ large, the volume's not turned up on that. It's just, it's a facet. It's one of the many, many strata in the film that begin to intrigue you. And you kind of, they're implied narratives. You're thinking, what's happening? You know, how are they having a relationship? Have they had a relationship? Where's the mother? What's happened to the mother? You're always asking questions. And the reason you're asking questions is because the film is sympathetic to the characters.
It gives a lot of space to the characters and the details. He's able to make a portrait of the family not just by pointing the camera at the people, but pointing the camera at all the little things that the environment that they've created around them. And the pace is really important. And that pacing that's really important to me, the way that they make films. So that really chimes with me. The fact that he really allows time within the shots and the kind of rhythm of the whole piece itself.
This is a landscape film as well, and most of this is shot outside, which is the other remarkable thing, is that it's shot outside and it's shot with a Nagra, and yet somehow there are these amazing kind of moments of intimacy between them that are beginning to tell this story.
I was very concerned with this idea actually about the camera becoming part of the furniture. I'd written an article in '59, I think, about this, because I'd been following what Monsieur Coutan and Monsieur Kudelski had been doing. Coutan invented the Eclair camera, which we were using. These two things made it possible to do things in which what was happening with people was more important than the fact that they were being filmed. And the cameraman and the crew were responsible for turning themselves into sort of furniture that wasn't so interesting. And as I said before, we tried to do that in the sense that we didn't interact during shooting. We hardly interacted at all with them. But in the case of the Moon and the Sledgehammer, this did not happen. Because obviously with Oily Page, the fact that we was being filmed was the most important thing in the wood that day.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I never go where the cock never crows, and I wouldn't advise any of you to go where the cock don't crow. Walk up, ladies and gentlemen, to see the live lion stuff was drawn. 2 spots on his belly and 1 on his. Get away on you. Stand back, you boys. The elephant's about to make water. All the felt outs I ever felt, I never felt a felt out that felt like this felt.
Apparently, Mr. Page, the elder, was a buffoon, was somebody that was used to performing at local circuses and so on. And it comes across when he's pretending to be an elephant, or when he's putting on the sunpoil as war paint. And there's all this stuff that is just kind of coming at you when you're least expecting it. And when he's lifting his daughter up on the forklift truck and starts driving her through the trees.
And like cherry picking.
Yeah, all that stuff is just you could never script that.
No.
You can film it, you can capture it, and you can exploit that to make somebody look very stupid. Or you can make somebody look incredibly contented and happy and funny.
The complicated interactions between the family, the extraordinary careers of the family. Here we have an engineer in the middle of a wood who was once a commercial clown. This is extraordinary stuff. This is stuff you would never dare invent. It's the whole point of documentary, the stuff you would not dare invent.
He came in at the end of the First World War, and as he says to me once, he said, "I've seen war and that," he said, "and I've walked all over it, and I don't want to ever have anything to do with it again." It is all part of his background. But he was also an engineer in other parts. I think he put together aircraft engines, and he tells stories about people pinched his engines in order to get top marks,
Really?
Yes.
And there's a great kind of relationship between all of them that begins to unfold. And then, of course, the drama towards the very end, you realise that actually they're quite dysfunctional within their relationships, and that maybe the sons aren't happy with the dad, and that maybe the daughters also aren't happy with the dad, and that maybe one of the brothers does quite like the sister, and then one of the sisters is almost mute. And why is she mute? Is it because she's sulking? And then the older brother, Peter, who's also pissed off that the other guys seem to be very interested in his traction engine that is the wheel's the wrong side. So suddenly all this friction, all this drama.
You won't get that to go, Pete. Huh? That won't go. Why won't it? You've got air in the pipeline on that. In fact there is. And another thing, that's a dirty diesel. Is this rack properly working? Get on the south commencer. Let me swing and you do turn the thing on. All right? Let me turn the handle. You work the... Swing her up.
Although to begin with, it's a film about paradise, far away from motor cars and bank managers and all the rest of it, and it becomes a sort of idiom. Then the next thing that happens is that it turns out that actually they're not getting on very well.
He gets very angry, you know, if I'm away, and thinks. When I'm in sight and I come back, he says I've stolen something, stolen the dishes at the house, or to dishearten me, you know. And I say, oh, I haven't. And, you know, he said, oh, you have. And I said, well, try to prove it. He doesn't want to know.
Now, Jimmy knows the way to driving a hobnail in a pair of boots, but the other one doesn't know so much. And yet the other one that doesn't know anything, he thinks he knows it all. But I tell him he's got a long way to go.
No, I can't work with him.
Why not?
No, because he wants things all his way, all one-sided.
And where would you really go?
Oh, live right out in the wilds, miles from everywhere.
And away from here?
Oh, yes, definitely. I don't like it here.
I don't know, they're most funny. I should buy another place down there and get away from these up here, because they're funny. They're what I call half-bred lunatics.
Story of the sadness of the family and the breaking up of the family, which you couldn't deny was there. And it adds up to a sort of kind of sadness which is in life universally, and it's seen by the spirit of the people and by the things they say. It's dealt with. It's overcome. It's a lesson for everybody, really. That's what Jimmy did. Jimmy encouraged me to see that side of things instead of making a romantic film about people with sort of eccentricities.
Yes.
He wanted that reality to be conveyed. The part of the family that I knew has died out.
Has it?
Yes.
Completely?
Yeah, maybe Kathy and Nancy may be holding on at their home in Sussex, which I visited them at about 4 years ago, I think. But Jim has died, and he lived alone in the house until the end, and it is a sad story. And I can't, tell you more about it because I don't know more about it.
Driving away from this place, because I don't know where I'm going. Now, for her, that's a very personal statement. But for me, I write that down on my hand because it's kind of, when you enter the film, you're off on a journey. You don't know where you're going with this film.
No, you don't.
And that for me was just it's a kind of great, a very succinct kind of synopsis of this film. Is that take me somewhere that I've not been before.
Yeah,
I've never been to that place before. I've never met these characters before. And yet they're real. They're based in this world that we call reality. Yeah.
Where are you going, Kat?
Driving away and nobody knows where I'm going.
It must be one of the best DIY films ever made, because everybody there was able to do the most amazing things. Nowadays, people can't do at all.
This film is unique because every other documentary that I cut had got some kind of process that you could lock on to. might be an election, it might be a war in Burma, an opium war, it could be preparations for a football match. This film is unique.
Well, it's kind of an antidote to contemporary, certainly documentary filmmaking. And there's a contemplative space that you enter into with the Moon and the Sledgehammer. You know, I often think about the work of Tarkovsky and the way what he does with cinema and the pacing of his cinema. Whereas I think what Philip was doing with this, in a way, there is this space, this zone that you go into, which it's rare. It's very uncommon now.
And what Philip Trevelyan did so brilliantly was to observe so that all of that strangeness came out. And in the final version, so that it was shaped just enough to give you and me access to this extraordinary world. Because without that shaping, we would still be outsiders.
I think what makes it so unique is the way Philip works, in that he's a kind of anthropological guy. He's extremely tentative with everything, very, very tentative, that he doesn't tend to have very fixed ideas. He's got notions of what might work, but he's never forcing anybody into anything. And you have the feeling that the magic is being created at the moment. Of course it's not. Of course he's influencing the thing. But it's this rather gentlemanly and tentative way. And no way do I see it as exploitation. Absolutely. Even though he says kangaroo and he's leading Mr. Page on, he's only leading it on in the way that applause would lead the clown. It was also the freedom to do a dogma thing. It was a pure dogma, no lights, nothing, you know. So it was a kind of documentary film cameraman and filmmaker's dream in that sense. And it was a microcosm, it was a matrix which we were dealing with, and no extraneous material. It was possible to focus on it.
The more I see it, the more prophetic. You know, not necessarily the idea of going back to coal power or whatever, but there's something about looking towards energy sources beyond oil.
Definitely. Because there's no oil wells in England. There's coal mines.
So what do you think?
But England ought to be steam, run by steam. Oils and that's got to come across the sea and that. Too costly. The price of petrol and that steam will beat it. Steam will come back in.
You know, and now if you think of, you know, wind or you think of solar energies, there's something about the kind of philosophy and the metaphysical that the pages, especially the father, talk about. There seem to be, you know, really good windows into the future.
Definitely,
and they resonate now. You know,
Yes.
you pick up on that. You think, Jesus Christ, you know, they weren't bumbling. You know, this is the thing that I love their cant. I love the way in which they spoke. I love their dialect.
Yeah.
And I love the fact that there was this ambiguity and this madness to what they were talking about that was so compelling. And now it seems to be really pertinent.
Yeah.
You know, pertinent in a way that back in the 80s you'd never imagined, certainly in the 70s when it was made.
I think it's an honourable bridge between that, which was mostly sort of pre-war, and the sort of films which have come subsequently, documentaries which many documentaries made nowadays are didactic. Many of them, especially if they're made as television features, as this might be if someone was trying to make a film like this today, are too loose and unorganized. This is organized. It's organized, you could say, up to the hilt, but it's organized in a poetic way. It's put together by the filmmakers going with the flow, seeing what works with what, and combining it all into a wonderfully poetic whole. And that, I think, is something which could be, and clearly is, every now and then, influential on the way films are made today. It's a return to a sort of art filmmaking, which sounds derogatory, but it isn't. Film is an art, and why should it not be treated that way? And among its artistic potentials, why should not the poetic potential, the poet's way of putting things together, not be exploited and celebrated? That is what The Moon and the Sledgehammer does.
The Moon and the Sledgehammer represented the highest level of documentary filmmaking I've ever worked on, and it was in some way the peak, the culmination of everything I'd been learning and working with intuitively. And in one sense, after Moon and the Sledgehammer, I never worked on another documentary like it. That was the end, because for me it was perfect, and I'd said all I needed to say as a cameraman.
A lot of the work that I've done since then was perhaps inspired by making this film and by listening to some of the things that I picked up, not as though they were wise words exactly, but because they were, I instinctively agreed with those people and thought the same thoughts as they did in lots of ways, even though they weren't analysed and so on. I've learned if you slow down a little bit in your life and you repeat and live on the same bit of land for 35 years, which I've done, you get to know the land that you live on and the people that you live near you, and within the 5 square miles that you work and live, you create a kind of friendship which gives you an understanding which you don't get from living a temporary life with a 9-to-5 timetable, going home at night only and working all the time in an office. I've got something to tell townsfolk, just as Mr. Page had, and I'm sure townsfolk always got something to tell country folk, but it's about time that some of the things that are learnt by living a life in one place with the same community got what we've learned about living as a community should be conveyed to some of the people in towns who don't share what we can share. So we've got this time to think and to reflect that they haven't on some of the best things in life. I also think that the other thing is that life is full of sadness, and that it's important to remember that sadness and make sure it's so important to remember how to triumph over it by enjoying